Hello, this is Ron Destro, founding director of the US-based Oxford Shakespeare Company. And today we are going to give you a sampling of our book, The Shakespeare Masterclasses, which features transcriptions of classes by people such as Sir Derek Jacobi, Dame Diana Rigg, Tim Pigott-Smith, Frank Langella, F. Murray Abraham, Jeremy Irons, Glenda Jackson, Michael York, Ron Cook, Malcolm McKay, Priyanga Burford, John Barton, and Cicely Berry. Now, these master classes came out of our workshops. Every year we offer a 10-day performance workshop on site. We've done Hamlet in Elsinore, Macbeth in Birnam Wood, Richard III on Bosworth Field, Henry V on Agincourt in France, The Merchant of Venice at Belmont in Venice. And in addition, the book includes an introduction on how to approach a Shakespearean role, as well as a chapter of exercises for voice, movement, text work, character development, and so on. So many of these master classes came out of our performance workshops. For more information on the book or the workshops, please click on one of those links at the bottom. So now let's enjoy a sampling of the classes offered by these wonderful teachers. Now here's a class with Sir Derek Jacobi and the question, how do you approach speaking a Shakespearean text?
That's the trick of it, to make the text sound as if it is spoken thought. It's the way that you quite naturally express yourself. Thoughts occur to you, pluck them out of the air, you give life to them, you give feeling to them, you give emotion to them, you give thought to them, and you speak them. And a lot of actors, very good actors, given a Shakespearean text, kind of clam up. They become very reverent about it. They learn it as a speech. And you can hear when you're watching them, you can actually see the page. But you've got to get it off that page and put it onto the stage. But very often it comes across as a learned text, and things like tonality, intonation, inflection seem to be forgotten. In a modern play, contemporary play, of course, we use our voices up, down, inside, out. We inflect, we intone, we pause. But given a Shakespearean text, often all those quite natural things that actors do get kind of stultified, and this reverence creeps in. This is Shakespeare. This has to be delivered in a different way. It's not different. It's not different. The secret is to make it sound contemporary. It's not easy, but at the same time, it is special.
Do you have a plan to intone a certain way? I mean, if you're working on a speech, would you say, I think I should go up here or down here?
No. I think that way madness lies. This is where I diverge totally from somebody like Peter Hall, and you're going to meet John Barton next week, and what I'm probably saying now is anathema to him. But that doesn't matter. I've worked with John very, very, very well, and he is a hard taskmaster. Anyway, no, the dumpy, finishing the line, going up, and all that. No, it's boring as hell. Speaking from the theatre. No, we don't know how the texts were punctuated. And I think a healthy disrespect for punctuation is essential. If you want to make the line mean something else to what it obviously means, then do it. If that is your character, that is how you're thinking and feeling. If that is what some of the other characters trigger in you. You mustn't sit in the bath at home or on the loo at home and think of all these wonderful things you're going to do at rehearsal next day. Write them all down and itemize them. Because the moment you get to rehearsal, somebody else has been doing that. And then you clash. You've got to be able to be free to express your own thoughts and your own take on it, but at the same time to respond to what everybody else is doing. And that may very well trigger something else that you've never thought of. It's very difficult, you see, when actors say, oh yes, but my character wouldn't do that. Well, of course your character, given the circumstances, given the situation, could possibly do that. We all spend our lives acting out of character if we are in a situation of which we are uncertain.
A class with John Barton on working the sonnets.
And these sonnets are good workshop pieces because they're short and they all contain strong bits of things that Shakespeare keeps on doing wherever he writes in any play. So they have great relevance to acting Shakespeare. I'm not interested in doing sonnets, which were written to be read anyway, but are useful in workshop contexts. They are either soliloquies of you alone talking to and sharing your thoughts with an audience, or you're talking to someone. They're all one or the other. But you've got to share your thoughts because you need to. You can't just stand up and do a sonnet. That's statement. That's boring. I've got to tell you about my sex life, folks. Listen, I need to say all this. I need to put it into words. That's the impulse. You can't do a sonnet without an impulse to talk about your sex life. It's not just people doing it, but audience watching you, listening, because you are then willy-nilly in a dramatic situation. You're in a play where at this point in time you need to talk to an audience. That's more than enough said.
Do you think we should approach Shakespeare and modern work the same?
Different writers write differently. There's no absolute rules now. For instance, Ben Jonson, the other famous playwright, didn't like antithesis, and he tended to avoid it. It's what is in the text. You can't generalize and sweep together all modern writing because some of it's heightened, some of it's not, some of it's naturalistic, some's quirky, some experiment with different things. The approach is the same, is how does this text feel? Now, often that's not difficult to work out, and often it may be very naturalistic or psychological. It may or may not be. It's what does the text suggest to me is a more important initial question than what is my character. It was that way madness lies, and twice happened to me when an actor was coming to me at the end of rehearsal and said, I've got a bit of a problem. I don't think my character would say this. The answer is he's got the wrong character if he's on his text. The first thing you get is not what is my character. It's this is the text. How do I encounter and taste the text? That comes before anything else. You can't start to have ideas about the character until you've tasted the text. That's all.
Here is Michael York on Portia's speech in The Merchant of Venice.
This speech is absolutely typical of Shakespeare's method. It takes the form of a dialogue between two opposing ideas, with the most famous, of course, in the whole language being his Hamlet's to be or not to be. But here the actor becomes, like Portia, the character that she's playing, a lawyer, arguing persuasively on both sides of the case. Shakespeare is never absolute. His statements are always qualified. If it is one thing, then it's also another. If it's black, it's also white. Indeed, Shakespeare's mindset was one of dualities. Words are paired, and he loved characters who are twins. So absolutes are not his style. He doesn't create types, but complex, often contradictory characters. In his hands, as you've just heard, the most important word of that whole speech, but. But, no, where the whole argument revolves and changes. It becomes the most dramatic in the language.
On Shakespeare's characters.
Hamlet is both a prince and he's a sort of petty child. And Prospero admits that he's a battlefield where his reason and his fury fight it out. So that you must beware of taking a moral stand, of seeing Lady Macbeth as a monster or as Richard II as a good king. Because Shakespeare is too extraordinary for this simplification. He writes, of course, from everyone's point of view, so that we are both the quintessence of dust, yet we can aspire to the angels. All the plays show characters in conflict with each other, but Shakespeare specializes in showing characters in conflict with themselves, an absolute actor's gift. And the single speeches are the arenas where these conflicts are fought out. Well, so much for the play, but what about these characters? You know, compared to Dickens or Tolstoy, Balzac or Chekhov, many of Shakespeare's creations seem, have you noticed, they seem rather unwritten, scarce half made up. Well, I'm not talking about the Malvolio's and the Falstaffs and the Hotspurs. They spring to life and seem to leap off the page. But others appear to be little more than a collection of speeches. What about Shakespeare's attitude? How are we meant to take them? You look in vain for this. I mean, does he approve or disapprove of Falstaff? The old knight, for Bernard Shaw, was a disgusting and besotted old wretch. While for Orson Welles, he's the greatest conception of a good man, the most completely good man in all drama. And of course, I hope we've all read Professor Harold Bloom, for whom Falstaff is his hero. W.H. Auden went further, seeing him as a comic symbol of Jesus Christ. Only Shakespeare withholds his opinion. Well, Richard III in the play is certainly a bad king. Henry V, which the chorus compares to Mars, certainly seems to be a good one. But does Shakespeare approve of war? What are we to make of Richard II? One scene suggests approval, another the exact opposite. And it slowly dawned that if Shakespeare's characters seem incomplete, that's exactly how he intended them to be. He's not failing to produce a finished portrait, he's not even trying. Fundamentally, he's writing plays for actors, and he's giving them room, leaving them space. Anna Karenina is, I'd have to say, entirely Tolstoy's, but Hamlet is both Shakespeare's play and half the actor who are playing him. So there's never a definitive performance. I don't think he wants that. That's why his plays continue to be performed in every language, in every age, because they do have that openness and that extraordinary ability to carry on and appeal to different generations, to different countries, socio-economic groups. You know, there have been over 60 film versions of Hamlet and counting.
A class with Malcolm McKay. On Hamlet's dilemma.
Imagine yourselves as Hamlet, or Hamletina, or whatever. Hamleta. And you're a student. and you come home, and while you're a student, you hear that your father is dead. He's died. As far as you know, he's died suddenly, and is natural causes. And you come home, and your mother has pretty well married immediately another man. And you're just an ordinary person. And suddenly you run into this possibility, very strong possibility of running a ghost. This is all a bit, this possibility that he was murdered. Now, what's your reaction?
I need to find out what happened and why.
Well, that's rational. What's your basic emotional reaction?
You know, your stomach just falls out of you.
What's rage? So he's angry. So and that's something you don't often see. You don't often see angry Hamlets.
No.
You see depressed Hamlets, and you see moody Hamlets, and intellectual Hamlets, but you don't often see angry Hamlets.
No.
But I suppose he's angry, but has no equipment, either physical or mentally, to contain or use that anger. Yeah, he wants to scream. He won't go around hitting walls. I mean, what happens to this man when he's angry? What happens to... Now, it's an extreme emotion. He's extremely angry. He's beyond just being angry. He's not just pissed off about something. He is... The biggest thing in his life has happened to him. So what does he do?
He rebels against certain people, acts weird or crazy or strange. And
You see, this is one of the things that notes compassion. His reactions about what he should do are extreme. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. It's not a line of poetry. It's what am I? What am I? Now that's passion, I can see. And he's feeling the real stuff. He's feeling the real thing. So when he asks, well, why don't I do something? And when he says, am I a coward? That's a real question. Because that is how, in his world, that's how rationally you say, well, obviously, shouldn't I take revenge? Should I? You know, and these are real dilemmas. He has an opportunity to take revenge, gorgeous, and he bottles out of it. You know what that's in English? he ducks out of it. He doesn't do it. And then he's suicidal. Now, once you begin to understand the real emotional drives that this whole thing, and forget about the intellectual side of it, forget about the poetic side of it, forget about it being Hamlet and all the rest of it, most famous play in the world and all the rest of it, you actually begin to see a modern person, male or female, suddenly slammed up against an enormous dilemma. And so you have, in that, you have big questions. Well, it's obvious, I should kill him, I should kill Claudius. I can't, I'm a coward. Obviously I should kill Claudius. I can't, he'll go to heaven. I can't cope. I can't cope with any of this. I don't know the answer to this. I might kill myself. You know, very, very, I mean, and there's obviously a lot more going on in that than that, but that, roughly speaking, is his dilemma.
Now here is Dame Diana Rigg on relating to the audience.
It's an extraordinary process which I worship. I'm really lucky to spend my working life in this glorious profession. And when you think about it, it's communion. And it sounds maybe pompous, and forgive me if you think it is, but the audience comes to believe. What could be stronger than that sort of communion? They give us their belief, and it is up to us to honour that belief with the best work we possibly do. And always be humble, about the fact that they're there. Never take them for granted.
And now a class from Tim Pigott-Smith.
How do you then approach a Shakespearean role? Do you scan it first and look at the academic, or is that all second nature now to you?
Yeah, I suppose one of the things I find rather weird about these classes is that, you might give an impression that through the very detailed text approach that it's a sort of organised thing. Well, Terry Hands, who was another RSC, Royal Shakespeare Company director, said that the two qualities you needed to be an actor were a madman and a monk. And it's very, very good, because you have to do, especially with Shakespeare, I think, the monk-like work. You just have to go through it. But if you're not a madman as well, you're on a hiding to nothing. And the most important thing underlies any piece of work you do is an instinctive response to the text. If you don't have an instinctive response to the text, in my experience, it's very hard to find. It doesn't come late in the day, however much work you do.
Question, what does verse do to a play?
Because the play's written in verse, it allows you to go further up the emotional scale than you would in a naturalistic play. I mean, one of the things I always quote as being what verse does for you is the first speech of Claudius in Hamlet. You speak it as if it makes sense. That's fine, it makes sense. You speak it on the structural line, you become a king. That's what it does for you. It lifts your status. And the thing about the form of the blank verse is that it lifts the emotional status. It means that you can build in a way that you just couldn't if it was naturalistic. I don't know why, it just enables things to happen.
And now Frank Langella answers the question, King Lear goes through so much emotion through the course of the play. Were there ever nights when it's hard to feel it?
You better well know your lines. You better well have your technique in place. Because as I said before, it doesn't matter what you're feeling. You must convince the audience of it. So if I'm not, some nights it's just swords and I'm full of inspiration. All sorts of things happen. And some nights it's hard work. But then I have my technique. I have my skill, which is what you must have as an actor. You must train your skills, your sense of speech and enunciation and diction and obligation to the play. Too many American actors, I think I'm going to wait for that moment of inspiration. It's going to come over me and then I'll know. The fact of the matter is, be a worker. Just be a worker. Just go out there and do it and do it and do it. Inspiration comes out as a result of the groundwork you've done. If you go out looking for inspiration, you're going to, you watch somebody cry on their television, or I just cried a moment ago. I didn't know I was going to. And then I had to fight not to. That came upon me because that's what emotion is. But if you go out every night expecting to have that at your fingertips, go out and do the work, and then on certain nights, something magical takes over. But not without technique.
Here's a class with F. Murray Abraham. How to act on a noisy film set.
So what you have to do is bring your own quiet with it. You got to know when you come on to that set, whatever it takes for you to have your own space. Don't let someone like the sound person, which has happened before, not that happened to you again, but they say things like, just before they shoot, they'll say, talk a little louder. It's your job. The only thing you can think about when they said it is, talk a little louder. Because your whole character is Al Pacino told this story about working with Brando when the first Godfather. Brando ended up with 126. Al, you don't have to start acting when they say action. interesting concept. You can't take too much time. As I say, it's expensive. But don't go. It's yours now. But when you do come prepared. I'm not talking just about the lines. I mean, that's a gift. 3 lines. But bring that thing that we always talk about with you. Where are you coming from? Where are you? Where are you going? Very simple stuff. Because when you're on a set, I mean, a lot of stuff now. It takes you a solid imagination to carry it through.
And now a class with Jeremy Irons on communicating ideas and feelings in a nonverbal way.
You know, acting is a communication. It's not one person spouting off. It's 2 people, the audience member who you are, and the actor who he is, communicating and making the audience member work and wonder and sometimes laugh and sometimes disagree, but nevertheless be engaged. And in order to do that, you have to be open and normal and hopefully fairly transparent. And that's something that technique will give you. So the communication can happen, but somewhere between you and the audience, rather than them sitting there thinking, yeah, he's quite good. You know, acting is choices, always choices. What choice do you make at every moment? They may not be conscious choices at the time, but because of where you're working from in your head, they are choices. And interesting actors who make interesting choices. Very difficult to say that because one wants to be interesting. How can you be interesting? You know, but I think maybe truthful choices is what one's showing towards, and intelligent choices.
Here's a class with Glenda Jackson. Question: can you tell us about your approach when working on a Shakespearean role?
You read the script.
Yes.
And I studiously avoid all academic interpretations of the play and any indication of previous performances. And it's all in the script.
Do you look at the meter or ignore it, or just does it matter?
Well, obviously it matters because there's a rhythm, which is part of unlocking the play. I mean, when I say unlocking the play, I mean finding the energy of the play. But he really only ever asks 3 questions: who are we, why are we, what are we, to which there are no definitive answers as yet. And so you have to work it through the character and all the other characters. It isn't a solo performance ever in any way. And it's all in there, but you have to dig it out.
But you go to rehearsal to discover new things.
You go to rehearsal. First of all, you go to rehearsal to learn the cues. The worst thing, because you learn to forget, actually. I mean, you hopefully learn your lines, but the really important stuff are the cues. It's the first time you've heard it. However many times you've done what bloody play, it's the first time you hear it, which is why I say every performance is the first time you do it. And if it isn't the first time you do it, then what are you doing there? You know, I mean, mere repetition, that isn't what it's about. You have to create that sort of unbroken circle where, you know, there's a group of strangers sitting in the dark, a group of people come on in the light, energy hopefully goes from the light into the dark. The dark picks it up and throws it back to you with a bit more energy, and then eventually a perfect circle is created. And it can happen. It doesn't happen every time, but because it can happen, and because you've experienced it, you believe it will happen again.
Here is Ron Cook on the first day of rehearsing a production.
Actually, I have a very good story about Derek. Actually, it was the first day of Lear, and I walked into the rehearsal room, and there was a young boy there. I can't remember his name. It was one of his first jobs. He was young, just playing pages and things like that, and he looked terrified. So I went up to him and I said, "Hello, I'm Ron." I said, "You look scared." He said, I am. I said, "So am I." And he said, I don't believe that. I said, oh, the first day of rehearsal, especially on the Shakespeare. And at that moment, Derek came in the door and he ran over to me and went, oh my God, I'm terrified. And I went, there you go.
On the legendary RSC voice director, Cicely Berry.
I was a young actor, joined the RSC, and we were all given an individual lesson with Cis. And at college, I never got on with sort of reserve and all this technical breathing stuff, his voice.
Sure.
So I sort of lost confidence in my voice. So Cicely Berry walks in the room and she goes, she says, you look frightened. I said, I am. She said, why? She said, well, you're Cicely Berry. And I said, I don't have a very good voice anyway, especially not for Shakespeare. And she said, who told you that? And I said, well, I didn't get on with it at college. You know, I had an accent and all that. And she said, okay. And she said, do you do any sports? And I said, sports? Do you play football? Oh, cricket, football, squash? Yes, I do all that. I said, football? Are you good at football? I said, I'm not bad, actually. So she disappeared. She came back to the first room with a football. And says, go on, show me what you can do. So I was kicking this ball around. Yeah. And then she said, I'm not very impressed. She said, darling, I'm not very impressed. Did you ever meet her?
Yes,
yeah,
many
yeah,
times.
Yeah, yeah.
Many times.
So when I started kicking around, heading it, I'm doing all this thing. Went on for about a quarter of an hour like this. Getting the sweat off. And then suddenly I'm stopped. And there's a paper in front of me. It's a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem. And she said, it doesn't matter what it means, just say it. And I spoke in this voice camera. And she grabbed me and said, that's your voice. Remember, that is your voice. Don't let anyone ever tell you you can't do it.
Here is Priyanga Burford on character and text.
The words that a character will use are really, really big clues to the way that they see the world. So, for example, some characters, even though they're not lawyers, will use really legalistic language.
Right.
Some characters, even though they're not shepherds, will use this very kind of bucolic language about nature and flowers. You can tell what a person's into, or the way that they're looking at the world. You know, is the world for them a puzzle that they have to solve mathematically almost and logically? Is the world an enemy that they have to fight? They use a lot of battle imagery. Are they someone who therefore feels that the world is against them and they're going to fight the world? So you can tell a lot from the kinds of words that he's put in the mouths of the characters. So that's a really fun, for me anyway, thing to kind of go through. And also, it's funny, when characters are at an emotional, when they're at the crisis point, the language that they use during crisis points, the things that they turn to, the stuff that they use to articulate their, deep sadness or their deep anxiety or their deep joy. I don't know, that's a big clue as well. They might, sometimes they talk in very natural terms. Sometimes they talk in cosmic terms. Sometimes they talk about jewels or, I don't know, gold or something. That's also a big clue about who they are.
A class with Cicely Berry. Can you tell us about the vocal challenges of speaking Shakespeare?
It was a time when I felt when there was a time for change, when we wanted Shakespeare to sound much more of the time. And yet, how do you do that? And I think actors today have a very difficult job in making it sound as though it is being spoken for now, yet making us, an audience, hear the richness of the language, where it takes us into such a deep part of ourselves, our voices. And so we've got to get the audience to hear, because Shakespeare always has a political, I believe he's a great
everything he writes has a political message. So you have got to make the audience hear that, and yet keep it so that it sounds as though it is being spoken for now. Because he had this incredible gift of being able to write down in the rhythm of our thoughts, which is why we somehow remember. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.